Welcome back to the Fan Engagement Pod. It's our first episode for a while, and you can catch up with the many other episodes via fanengagement.net, Acast, or your favourite podcast app. This episode is the first of what I hope will be several with the UK's expert on consultation, Rhion Jones. Known professionally as the Consultation Guru, we've been collaborating for some months now as the Football Governance Bill makes its way through Parliament, paying specific interest, of course, to the provisions on consultation and engagement. You can read the letter we wrote to the Minister in charge of the bill in the Lords, Baroness Twycross, and the reply she sent on fanengagement.net. We discuss how consultation works, why it's different to engagement, and why its impact on football could be very positive. And we haven't had an episode for a while, but we're back for a few episodes, certainly this one, and I'm hoping to do a couple more, focusing on engagement and consultation as part of the Football Governance Bill currently going through Parliament. It's in the Lords at the moment. There's plenty on the website, fanengagement.net/news. Since earlier this year, myself and the UK's expert in consultation, Rhion Jones, have been discussing the bill and its provisions for consultation and my area of engagement in football. We've published articles on both our websites, and recently we wrote to Baroness Twycross, the Minister leading the bill through the Lords. If you want to read any of this, like I said, go to fanengagement.net/news. You can subscribe at /join, or the Consultation Guru website is excellent on all things consultation, consultationguru.co.uk, and look at recent blogs. Apologies for my appearance. I was at my last Dom's Trust board meeting last night. I stand down on Monday. I've done my 2-year slot as a director of the owners of the football club, which has been educational, and I'm going to probably do something on that at some point in the blog. But Rhion is looking natty, being the guru that he is, wearing his tie. I wanted him to wear his Christmas jumper, but that's not how it works. And the man is a consummate professional. Rhion, we've known each other for a little while, and we've had some great conversations. I've really enjoyed meeting you and getting to know you. You work under this moniker, the Consultation Guru. So obviously that gives us a hint at your level of expertise in this area. Tell us a bit about your background, if you would.
Well, it's the moniker they give you when you get to be my age and style. Well, thanks so much, Kevin. It's been great actually to hone in on football governance and football consultation. Just to give you a bit of background, I tell people I'm a failed Welsh politician in the sense that I once stood for Parliament 45 years ago, and the good people of that particular constituency didn't vote for me in sufficient numbers. I believe I had a narrow escape from a parliamentary career, and I think the country probably had a narrow escape as well. But indeed, for the last 25 or more years, actually, the centerpiece of my life has been focusing on public and stakeholder consultation. It's a fairly unloved concept. People say, oh, it's another consultation. I've spent most of those years, and the books I've written, I wrote a book called The Art of Consultation. I then wrote another one called The Politics of Consultation, because my thesis is that if you do consultation properly, it's very, very good, very useful, both for the consultor, which is the term we use for the people doing the consulting, whether it's a government department or indeed if it's a football club, and the consultee. We're all consultees. We're being asked, what do we think, time and time again. And I've been a kind of champion for best practice consultation. 23 years ago, I formed what became known as the Consultation Institute, sadly no more, and I finished working with it a few years ago. But that must have trained 10,000 maybe people, because people look for local authorities, people look for the health services, all manner of organizations do consultation, whether it's Shell Petroleum or indeed whether it is Camden Council. And we trained all these people in best practice. And I guess that's how we found each other, wasn't it, Kevin? Because you were looking at best practice, and I said, I know a bit about that.
Indeed. No, and I mean, it's I was waving Rhion's book, which doesn't really show up because of the blurring function on Zoom, but the Politics of Consultation, I've got that to finish over whilst the relevant chapters over Christmas, actually, Rhion. I'll put it down on my reading list. Sorry?
You're a sad man.
Well, I've actually got another one as well, which is called Leading the Listening Organisation, which is another really good book by a former podcast guest, Howard Craze, and a couple of colleagues. I mean, yeah, and my interest is certainly obviously because of what I do in football, and I think it probably falls more within my area of interest as a practitioner because I've done consultation for some in some non-football projects with a company called ECF, particularly a guy called Oliver Deed, who runs that. I did some work up in London, some mayor's money, and some other things. So I think what provoked me, or what means that I'm interested in this, is because I can see, even if we weren't going through the process of looking at the football governance bill, even if that wasn't a thing, for me, processes are really, really important. I like organisations to be iterative. I think it's really good when they are. I think they're much stronger when they're able to decide a little bit more on the fly, if you like, but they need to have good structure and they need to have good process. If you have good structure and good process, good rules, it makes you able to operate much more freely, I think. So it's sort of, I think this is going to lead us into what we're going to talk about in football. Some people look upon it as as some terrible duty and it's a terrible bind, but actually, look, if you do this properly, it can be tremendously liberating in a lot of ways and give you a lot of freedom, can't it?
You have to put all of this in a historical perspective. I mean, over the last 100 years, management, if you just think of management theory, has moved from totally autocratic, the boss always knows best, never consults anybody. You can go through the rise of the trade union movement. But, I cut my teeth about 30, 40 years ago on that whole wave of excellence. Does anybody remember In Praise of Excellence, or whatever all those books were called? When all of a sudden companies, and many of them were American, they weren't British, became very customer conscious. They started engaging with their customers. They started consulting their customers. Now, in my life, I worked for an IT company for 7 years, and I was the manager of worldwide customer satisfaction. It was my job to find out what the customers thought of us, which wasn't always good news. And that sort of took me on the journey towards proper formal consultation, because once you start realizing that sometimes people you think are your fans actually don't think very highly of you, it's but a small step to say, well, what can we do to change those perspectives and those perceptions?
Yeah, and actually, in terms of, I was waving that Leading the Listening Organisation book, which is a piece of public relations work. This is where my interests begin to collide with yours in that sort of statutory, well, not. I know it's not always statutory, but in those areas of consultation, and actually, it starts to dovetail into what I'm trained in, which is public relations, and what I teach in my other with my other sort of hat on as a university lecturer at UCFB Wembley, where I'm teaching people public relations theory and practice. And actually, a lot of it did come from the States, and it is about understanding what the customer wants and not just attempting to deliver it. And sometimes actually, attempting to deliver it without any proper insights. The other thing as well is it's increasingly about, and this is where we start to come into football, about what we might call co-creation. Sometimes it is actually frequently, I think, in the customer relationship, you are providing something that you want to sell to the customer, right? It's not a sort of make your own product and the company sells you what you demand. Sometimes it is, frequently it is about providing a product, but sometimes it's about shaping what that product might look like. And then when you start to get into service industries, it would be, and then we're starting to move then into, I think football sits sort of within the service industry to some extent. Then we're starting to get into, well, this isn't like the local. I like to compare my local corner shop. I did it in one of my recent articles. The fella down the road has built this business. He's had to do it anticipating what people want. He does use a lot of feedback, by the way, but he's in a position to be able to kind of do what he wants to do. And then he rises and falls by that. We're talking about football clubs here. This is where it starts to get interesting with what you do. We're talking about football clubs, and they have this very odd place in the world. And in that sense, you don't really have much of a choice as a customer. It's a bit difficult to choose to go somewhere else. So that's where we...
Back for a second. The magic moment in the evolution of all of this, and it came about 30, 40 years ago, is when the top American brands really discovered that the more contented your customers are, and it's obvious really looking back, the more contented your customers are, the more faith they've got in your brand, and the more loyalty they have to you as a company, the more profit you make. So there's nothing much altruistic about this. I mean, forget all about public consultation with governments and so forth. I'm sure we'll come to that at some point. You know, the genesis of consultation comes from private companies in the capitalist sector realizing that it's good for business. And I think that is particularly opposite when you talk about football, because football is, you know, a very, very commercially driven business, as are so many others. And I think if we can take the lessons that have been learned over the years about how you bring that base of customers, call them fans if you like, and you use the term co-creation, co-production is what the public sector has moved. And you'll find in the health service and other places where the emphasis now is, well, if you want to, you know, discuss the best possible treatment for this disease or that disease, you sit down with the people who've had the misfortune of suffering from it, and you learn the lessons from the customer, if that's the appropriate term, or the patient's point of view. So I think there's a coming together of many strands of this. There's a management strand, there's a public service strand, and there's a regulatory strand, which is how do you actually keep some form of public community control over forces that are global in many of their characteristics. And, you know, how do you balance the competing interests? Well, so I think it's coming together of many, many rather important themes.
Yes, excellent. Football, just a quick one. Club? You have a club? You don't you?
Absolutely.
You do
when I was a very young man, I used to go to see what was then Swansea Town.
Oh, you saw them when they were
days of a man called Ivor Allchurch. There'll be very few of your
I know the name.
Listeners who may remember that, and a man called Cliff Jones, and then went to Spurs. So I was brought up understanding absolutely what it was to identify with what was, in my case, although I was a North Walian with other allegiances, I came to live near Llanelli. So the problem for me was that we had a world-class rugby team. It's still the Scarlets, but my father, being North Walian, took me to the Vetch field in Swansea. And Swansea over the years has been a very interesting case study because it's been a club that's known the depth of performance. It's a club that's also been in the Premier League for 8 to 9 years, you know, within the last decade. So, and I also went through a phase of supporting Cardiff City when John Toshak was the forward. So, yes, I relate to football, as I think a huge number of the population do. And it may be difficult.
And if I can just say, Silver Award winner in the Fan Engagement Awards this year, as a result of the Fan Engagement Index. Well done, Swansea City. So just a bit of a plug. So these words, right? Okay, consultation, engagement. You know, I mean, I've thrown them around a little bit. I mean, I think I probably have more understanding around what they are than most people, but they get used quite interchangeably in talk around, I think especially in a sort of, if you want to call it kind of public relations sense, when you're explaining, the process of getting information from your stakeholders, your customers, your publics, if you're doing public relations, and using it to shape what you do, or co-creating or co-producing or whatever. But they are quite specific. I mean, and consultation is an extremely specific term, isn't it? Can you just explain a little bit? Because
there are 5 terms, and you can blame the politicians for this if you like, but it's not just them. There are 5 terms that are used very often interchangeably without people realizing the different views. They are participation, involvement, engagement, consultation, and sometimes empowerment. And these are all very voter-friendly terms. Oh, I want to involve you, says the parliamentary candidate. We must have more participation. They are voter-friendly, they are public-friendly, and used interchangeably and without knowing the subtle differences between them has caused enormous confusion. Now, we once, I don't know if you know this, under an Act of Parliament in 2008, which I hate to tell you was probably the Local Government and Public Involvement in Health Act. We had a duty to involve placed on local authorities. I remember being called to a very high-level meeting in what was then the Ministry of Local Government to seek, alongside others, to define the word involvement. And they were wasting their time because nobody has ever created a watertight definition for involvement. Right? Mm-hmm. Participation is another one of a similar ilk. But the two that are important, especially in the light of the legislation, is engagement and consultation. Engagement is a very wide concept. It embraces all the different ways that one body interfaces with another body. Technically, the way we use engagement is it's how you set up, how you establish and nurture a relationship. It's a bit like getting engaged to be married. That's what engagement is. It's all about the relationship. Now, within that huge spectrum of a relationship you establish with people, there is a very formalized, very specialized thing called consultation. Now, consultation basically is a dialogue between a consultor who basically wants to have a discussion with consultees about either proposals or plans, program of action. When you're saying, this is what we have in mind, and maybe there are 5 options, maybe there's only 1 or 2 options, and it's a dialogue, an honest dialogue, so that the consultees can influence the consultor. Now, there's no point in the consultor doing it if he's already totally made up his mind. So the main difference these days, summarizing, because this can be a very long lecture, the main difference is that whereas engagement, anything goes. You can't go to a court and say, I haven't been engaged with. But you can go to court and say, I haven't been consulted because there are rules. They're called the gunning principles. You might explore them later on, but there are very strict rules with engagement. And if you notice, go to politics now, you will hear almost every day in the House of Commons, members of Parliament standing up. They may be talking about their local hospital. They may be talking about a forthcoming incinerator, or let's make it topical, maybe a prison that's going to be built. And they will say, my constituents have not been consulted. They don't use the word engaged with, because they know that's not much enforceable. My constituents haven't been consulted. So consulting people, consultation is the more demanding standard. There are rules, you have to observe them, whereas engagement is all the interactions that you will undertake between yourselves and your target class.
The broad umbrella, as it were. Yeah, interestingly, and I want to pick up on that word dialogue, because this word dialogue has been used a lot in football. I think maybe to some extent it's partly I'm probably partly guilty of that use, because it's something that within the fan engagement index, dialogue, governance and transparency, the 3 measures, the dialogue being the conversations that go on. Lots of people use this, and they don't mean what we call in public relations. I don't want to go too much into the public relations theory, but essentially symmetrical, where you take on board what people are saying and you change what you do as a result of that. It's the co-creative bit. And the problem is football says that a lot. We're entering into dialogue. So the classic one at the moment, broadcasting deal. Broadcasting deal allows the broadcasters and the league, essentially really the broadcasters, to lead football by the nose, because football has decided it can be led by the nose. If it decided it didn't want to be led by the nose, it could put into its deal a clause that says no kickoffs at 7 o'clock on a Sunday, like Man United and Fulham are controversially are doing in a few weeks' time, or in early next year. And the dialogue thing, it gets mistaken. What a lot of football clubs are practicing is asymmetric public relations, where they're taking on board what fans are saying in order to ensure that the thing they're doing, which the fans probably won't like, is delivered in the most palatable way. Now, that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about consultation, is it? What we're talking about in consultation sometimes, of course, because there are things that happen that have to happen. Sometimes you might be changing it a bit. Sometimes you are trying to work out whether people are going to like what you do a bit more than you are creating it. But is it, is it misunderstood in a similar way in the sectors you work in, or is football unique? I suspect people are carrying into football what they sort of practice in their business in elsewhere, and they're seeing.
And the main driver for my activities in recent years has been realizing that a lot of consultation is very poor, it's very tokenistic, it's not very good, and it doesn't achieve very much. So I've been championing good quality, best practice consultation. I'd like to come back to the example that you quoted, and I'm turning it in my mind. What I think I heard you describe, I would characterize as being a substantial amount of engagement, which they undertook, which the clubs may have undertaken in order to understand better the feelings of the fan base, and it then used that to do something else. Now, a key characteristic of consultation is that you absolutely haven't made up your mind. And where a lot of public bodies and private organizations get it wrong is they don't tell the truth about what they've already decided. And what you really want to hear in a consultation is people's opinions about those aspects you still have the discretion, where you still have an open mind. And it is quite difficult. I mean, just look at other fields of life. I am going this afternoon to a part of the country where they are absolutely up in arms because they do not want electricity pylons for understandable reasons. But what's happened is that the country as a whole has taken the decision that we're going to upgrade the national electricity grid. So that is effectively not up for grabs. So part of this conundrum between engagement and consultation is deciding where is it where lots of decisions have been taken, but you're still quite interested to know what people think, and where is it that you can have a dialogue which can inform, can influence the decision that you are still yet to take. I don't know if that clarifies, Kevin?
Yes, very useful. And I'm going to make sure that we put signposts to things like the gunning principles. As I said, people can look either on fanengagement.net or they can look at consultationguru.co.uk to find more on the stuff that we did on that recently, the letter to Baroness Twycross.
Well, in that case, why don't we just summarize it like this? Because there are basically, and for people for whom this is new, there are 4 rules. And in simple terms, they are: 1, you only consult when you haven't made up your mind. What the lawyers call, it's still in the formative state. Number 2, you got to give people enough information so that they can intelligently contribute to the debate, right? And obviously, huge discussion about what is enough information, what's appropriate information. The third thing is you've got to give people enough time and enough opportunity to contribute to the debate. And the fourth, and in some ways the most important, is whatever is said to the consultor, that consultor is obliged to give careful consideration, it's taken into account in the decision making. Now, somebody once said these principles, they were formulated in 1985 by a wonderful man called Stephen Sedley, who became a Lord of Appeal. It's been said of these principles, well, they're just a statement of the bleeding obvious, aren't they? But where I think we'll be able to help the football industry is this statement of the bleeding obvious needs a lot of interpretation. For example, what exactly have you decided already? What exactly is the right amount of information? What exactly is the right amount of opportunity? And behind me, away from the travel guides, are the 300 high court cases over 40 years that have tried to refine. One of the reasons why people might be surprised at this country, and maybe we've got a lot to teach other countries in football governance, this country is the world leader in public consultation. Don't laugh. We're in some poor at it, but we're the world leaders. And the reason is we have a bigger jurisprudence. More cases have gone to court where we've had to think about, well, what happens if this occurs? What happens if that occurs? And that's why the gunning principles do matter. And one of our concerns, and I'm sure this will come out in the wash in the next few weeks, Kevin, isn't it? One of our concerns is the confusion, even in government, as to the extent to which those principles will apply when football clubs have the pleasure of implementing this in real time with their own fans, with both the risks and the many opportunities
and the rewards
they will gain from doing so.
Yeah, exactly, the rewards. So you're kind of hinting at really this question is that in respect of the potential challenges, I mean, the difficulties clubs are going to have. Let's put it. Let's not obfuscate. Let's use the language properly here. Instead of the problems coming down the line in respect to specifically consultation, what about the parallels with any other industries or sectors from your work in the field? Can you see anything where a new statutory, because this isn't just a new statutory duty, this will be a whole framework of regulation that didn't exist. Have you seen this mirrored anywhere else?
Not really. One of the fascinating things you and I have been talking about is football is actually quite unique. Now, the nearest equivalent in a sense is the arts, because my wife and I, we are, I think, members or friends of the National Theatre, right? And of course, we're not therefore geographically rooted in London where the National Theatre is. It's a nationwide thing. The arts have got lots and lots of, let's call them fans, supporters all over the place, but nothing quite generates the amount of community loyalty, to my knowledge, than a football club. I mean, I struggle to think of many. In many ways, there are local groups that have enormous affinity and support for their local hospitals, right? So there are other parallels, but nothing is quite like it. Fundamentally, there's a difference between a consumer. We started this conversation talking about American companies realizing, our customers are also our fans, and let's look after them, right? There is nothing, because you're not just a consumer of football. You're not a customer. A fan is customer plus.
Yes.
Also other material and psychological.
I think there's a good phrase that Paul Barber, the chief executive and deputy chairman of Brighton Hove Albion, used, which was, "I want to be treated as a customer and respected as a fan." I think that was the phrase, and I like that because
that's brilliant. I like that.
I do want to see, and they're very good. A bronze award winner in the Fan Engagement Index, I might add, Fan Engagement Awards this year. It's important that people understand, and I've always been quite clear on this, is that the reason we complain about the beer being warm if we want it cold, or the beer being cold if we want it warm, or the fact that the food's ragged and we're being treated badly in the club shop, is because we have a customer sort of interface relationship with the club at various points. It's essentially the motivations that cause us to be a customer are very, very distinct. And I like the comparison with the arts in respect that you're not there unless you're you're generally there because you like the thing as a sort of experience, there's a connection with it that's harder to kind of understand. The other bit as well is, unlike the arts, and this is where we kind of get into, and I teach the sports business and football business as well, and I try to get this across to my students, is we have a series of monopolies. You are only granted the right to be a football monopoly in your local area if you have a registration with a county football association in England, and if you're Welsh, it's your registration with the FAW, and you're permitted to play obviously in the English leagues, and then you join a league, and those are the two things you need. And you do not have the right to open up. Haringey Borough couldn't rename themselves if they could get round the rules of IP, copyright, etc. Rename themselves Tottenham FC and open up in the Premier League. It doesn't work like that. You have to earn your corn. You have to work your way up, and then within that, as a bigger picture, they're acting as cartels because they're able to do things that no other businesses are able to do unless they get express permission from the government, because they are sport. And by the way, it's always worth pointing out to people, believe it or not, despite us leaving the European Union, European sports rules and administration are very, very influenced and rooted within the European Commission's rules on sport and the specificity of sport. I was involved in helping do some of this work in the early 2010s. it is really important that people understand, as much, I think, as lots of people want to see the opportunities, the marketing opportunities, the sporting opportunities in football and sport, but football specifically. It doesn't matter if you keep, if you come up with the greatest plan in the world for expanding the brand of X football club, there is this thing that you might call football gravity that will assert itself, which is that you are a monopoly provider of football in that area because once upon a time you were Newton Heath or you were Wimbledon Old Centrals and you became, or Swansea Town, and by accident of history, and until you manage to completely smash the system apart and buy every football club up in the world and have no competition, then that's how it's going to be, and you've got to work within that environment, right?
You might find this a little strange, but the analogy, the political analogy in Britain is the health service, because basically we nationalized the health service back in 1948. And the deal basically was, we are going to create a monopoly provider. That monopoly provider is answerable to Parliament. And over the 75 years of the health service, it's been a totally autocratic management structure. But the deal they struck, that Parliament struck, was in return for that, we will oblige the health service to consult the public more than any other public service. I frequently have to explain to authorities in local councils and local authorities that they've got it easy. Although they've got umpteen duties to consult, they don't have the extent of statutory obligation to consult that the health service does. So as people listening to this will know, if you're going to close maternity wing in Bedford Hospital, not that they're going to, and move it to Milton Keynes, they have to do a statutory consultation, which is quite onerous. So the deal very often is the more power you give those in charge, the more you need to have checks and balances by creating obligations to engage and to consult. And you could say it's quite remarkable that we've gone for the last 20 or 30 years without having some form of checks and balances. I mean, they don't necessarily have to be done by statute. The industry could have done it for itself, and of course has moved in that direction. Witness all the work that you've been doing on fan engagement. So yes, that's the analogy. And I guess what you and I are going to be about as 2025 comes about is helping clubs and fan organizations get the best out of the new arrangements. And it'll take a while to bed down, but there's a lot of things I think we can teach them about what works and what tends not to work.
And I think that's the important thing is, look, I mean, the two of us are working together because we've, there's something here that piques our interest. That's an opportunity for us to work in, to develop, and all that kind of thing. But the really important element, and I can say this having worked in and around football for such a long time, is if you do it well and you begin to kind of incorporate this process as iterative, if you like, as cultural, and that you start to understand that there are real benefits to it, it does become something that's easier to cope with. It doesn't mean, by the way, it's really important that we just, if I expressly say this, it doesn't mean that you have to, within football, sit there and read every single tweet directed at you, every single social media message directed at you.
Heaven forbid.
And take that on board and make your decisions accordingly. This is not about either, is it? And it still occasionally comes up. This is not about picking teams or anything like that. I've been on the board of a fan-owned football club for 2 years, and at no point have we been asked whether or not we want to buy X, Y, or Z player. That's not how it works. There are some checks and balances around the distribution of disbursement of transfer fees within the business, which, as a supporters trust owner club, we had the right to make decisions about where, or to recommend where that's allocated. That's the internal governance of the football club. It's about the checks and balances. I think, dare I say it, I think this is going to be, and it already is showing itself as a real challenge, I think, to the psychology of what football clubs have been for a long time. And they came from, and this is where I'd be very interested, and we'll take this, I think we're heading towards quite a natural point in this conversation around what we're going to be doing, is that understandably, football clubs have been autocracies for a long time. They were locally owned. They used to be owned by people who did genuinely, they lived in the local area, they cared about it. I'm really pleased to see in private ownership, there's a tendency towards some of these people, at Grimsby, at places like Rochdale, people returning to their roots a bit and not just saving them with a load of splurge, but actually restructuring them, making them better community-facing businesses, football clubs rather. But football has never really come to terms with the fact that it's that model worked when you were rooted and local. The trouble is, I think, that because we've got the internationalism, the globalization, all those things, football's tried to rush to that, and sport has to a large extent. And it has meant a huge tension in there. And actually, this tension isn't a natural part of the model. The tension doesn't really need to be there. I think people have convinced themselves that that's part of it, and that the fans all complain and throw brickbats at you, and then you just sign a better player and move on. No, the thing you've got to start to do is to sort of re-establish a bit more of an equilibrium. It used to be that the autocrat understood the fans because he was local and all that kind of stuff, or he owned the factory, and it was always a he. Now you have to actually go and work out what they want, because people are more mobile, they do different things. You just have to kind of inculcate that culture a bit now. We have to there's a bit of rediscovering it. It's not going back to the future. It's just a bit of rediscovery of what actually...
In what you just said, Kevin, there are about 3 or 4 actually rather challenging issues that we'll have to come to terms with. The fact that the social media age, without doubt, complicates the hell out of all of this. The fact that one's fan base is no longer in one country, let alone in one town. The fact that we have federations of football supporters in the other side of the world, and what role they're going to play. I was rather surprised to see how much opposition there was to the Football Governance Bill when the second reading debate took place at the House of Lords. But I also read the speeches, people like Lord Moynihan and Francis Maud and people like that. And you actually see that their anxieties are that the sheer complexity of this will prove too much of a digression for clubs who basically want to do the core business, which is of winning trophies and winning matches. And I think we need to work hard to reassure clubs and also fans that this is not a zero-sum game. It's not a question of displacing this activity. So for every moment that we spend talking to our fans, it's a moment we're not spending on the training ground. So there are a number of challenges, and I think we need to identify them. One of them is, what is a fan? The bill, as currently drafted, does not specify what a fan is. And I think the government have been quite wise, but sooner or later, before you do fan consultation, you've got to have in your mind some ideas on that. And I think the football regulator, as and when he or she is appointed, is certainly going to have a lot of challenges. And in a way, I think discussions like this, and I hope response that we'll get from people who are active in the sport, and actually people who are active in local communities, because I don't think this is really something for Leicester City Football Club to take on. It's for Leicester City Council and anybody who represents the community of Leicester or any other town, whether you're in the Premier League or whether you're in League Two. I mean, what I'm hoping is that if we can encourage a real debate on where these issues are that need clarification, provide some good tools and techniques for what works and what doesn't work, because we call them, in the consultation world, we call them dialogue methods. I've got a book somewhere behind me of 50 different dialogue methods, because there are lots and lots of ways of listening to people and letting them say what they want to say. I mean, what I'd like to do is to see the Premier League be not just a Premier League in football. I'd like to see the Premier League in dialogues with fans. That would be something we can export around the world every bit as much as we've exported the product on the field.
Yes. And that comes neatly then to the that we are planning on putting an event on in probably around sort of late February, early March now, for clubs and those in the industry wanting to understand more about the changes coming. Also a little bit about how it's sort of working at the moment and developing, particularly in, there are lots and lots of there's lots of discussion. There was in the debate the other day about, excuse me, the role of supporters trust, the role of other organisations, the role of fan advisory boards, and all these things which have, are coming and have come. So just as a quick ad for that, is that if anyone's interested in that, drop us a line at hello@fanengagement.net. You can also via Rhion's site, but obviously this is my pod, so I'm sticking the email in there. But it's for both of us. We're both developing this piece. It's really important that people, as I said, kind of, they see this as an opportunity where it works. It's the interesting element where it works really well. And actually, the Fan Engagement Index tries to show where these, even if it's not explicitly according to the governance arrangements that are going to be coming down the track, there are clubs that are developing good models and attempting to do best practice in this area. And I think the more you create that, the more we share that stuff with people and some of the stuff from outside of football as well, we can learn from outside of football, the better. I've got just another ad, sorry, Rhion, is a paper that I've been doing with Aryaman Banerjee, who's authored 2 reports on the independent regulator. He has worked with me rather on one on fan engagement, and that I'm hoping that will also segue nicely into what we're doing. That's going to be published a bit later because I'm just doing the final sort of finishing touches on it. So it's a really evolving space, and there is a tremendous opportunity. So certainly, I'm quite excited about working with you on doing that event, and I hope people will take us up on it. I've had a few expressions of interest already. So, but look, any final sort of thoughts from you there, Rhion? I mean, it's been
final thought is, remember, the bill is currently going through Parliament. We can't always predict what changes may be made. It's one of the reasons why we're delaying now until February, having our first of what I hope can be many seminars. I would like to take it to different parts of the country. I don't particularly want to drag people down to London. Absolutely. I mean, the centre of the football world isn't in one place. And if we wait until February, March, we'll have a much clearer idea of how the bill in detail is shaping up. I hope there will be an industry discussion as to what the regulator may or may not have to consider. But in any event, whether you have legislation or not, it's a good thing to consult fans, to engage with fans, and the more that we can do to get best practice understood and applied, then the happier we'll both be.
Terrific. Look, thanks for listening, everyone. Thank you, Rhion. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, any compliments of the season, wherever you are, and a Happy New Year. Rhion, please, a bit of Welsh for me.
Nadolig llawen, a blwyddyn newydd dda.
Lovely, beautiful language. I love the Welsh. And of course, the final advert is sign up for our weekly view on fan engagement. I'll put my teeth in, fanengagement.net/join. Rhion, as ever, it's been a pleasure, and I'll see you again soon.